Alrighty, yo, what's up? We're back again with another Moonkin Monthly. Basically, today we're going to be talking about Shadowlands Moonkin, just kind of like the state of the class, things I'm looking forward to, things I'm not looking so much forward to in relationship to Moonkin, and basically just talking about the state of the class for Shadowlands. Basically, it's going to be ignoring pre-patch, and yeah, this is kind of going to be just like a what to expect / what's new for Moonkin. There's been a lot of stuff that has changed on beta and may end up continuing to change, which can keep some things in fluctuation, such as talents or covenants. More likely covenants and like legendaries, but that kind of stuff. And less so other things. So that is probably the biggest disclaimer that I have for this whole entire thing. Yeah, basically it's going to be ignoring pre-patch. It's going to be talking about what's new for Shadowlands. I will have a Balance Druid video guide for Shadowlands coming out whenever Shadowlands is closer. But this is just going to be talking about like the state of, not necessarily a how to play kind of video, if that makes any sense. So first and foremost, we got to talk about Covenant and Legendary stuff, as that's probably the most important thing that will be changing come Shadowlands. And of course, you can check out dreamgrove.gg/beta in order to be able to get a lot of the sim data to try to look at and make useful interpretations for yourself. Again, a lot of this stuff is in flux, but this is currently up to date. You can see that down here is updated October 31st, the most recent changes, and there's a lot of different things that you can see here. Probably the most important thing is like the legendary and covenant combinations, where at the top we see Necrolord and Balance of All Things. Balance of All Things being the premier legendary, occupying all four of the top spots, and then you have just basically everything else kind of peppered in. Necrolord and Boat. Let's talk about that. So Necrolord is good on single target only if you are able to meet the conditionals that require like proper refreshes for Necrolord. Basically, for those who don't know, you're able to like refresh the Necrolord dot, like the 3-stack, into like a 4-stack, like very late into it to make sure that you maintain insanely high uptime. Or alternatively, if you macro cancel or adaptive swarm on all of your party members, you would be able to maintain near 100% uptime on adaptive swarm, the damage component. This is simmed, I think, assuming that you have like 70% uptime on adaptive swarm. So it's not like the 100% if you're like cancel auraing it off of all of your players or something like that. But Necrolord could see a pretty significant damage gain if you are doing cheesy things like using cancel aura to cancel it off of friendly players. Like basically you macro it into all of your abilities on your across your whole entire raid. That way that if it gets put on them as a heal, then it just immediately gets taken off and put back on the boss's damage. That would be ideal for you, but like obviously the sims don't take into account for that. This is like a normal uptime with like good usage. If you use it poorly, then of course this is going to be significantly worse damage. So Necrolord does have some conditionals for refreshing. I'm not going to go into them too much in this video. Maybe if Necrolord actually stays at the top and sees like legitimate progression usage, I'll talk about it. But I think as it currently stands, Venthyr seems like the go-to choice for early expansion stuff right now. And the reason for that is because like once you start getting into 2 and 3, like once you start getting into 3 targets, it starts to overtake all the other stuff. Like 2 targets, Necrolord is still kind of close because Circle of Life and Death legendary synergizes pretty well with Necrolord. But once you start getting more, Venthyr plus Circle of Life and Death starts to just like really pull away. So yeah. Also, Kyrian has been nerfed recently. Pelagos got nerfed, so that'll cut down on like how close Kyrian is. But basically, Venthyr with Circle of Life and Death legendary is at the top of the Covenant legendary combination. I don't mind Venthyr. I actually think Ravenous Frenzy is a decent ability, and I think it overall is decently fun to play. I think Circle of Life and Death as a legendary is incredibly bland, and I am not a fan of that. Basically, for those who don't know, Circle of Life and Death is a legendary that makes your dots do the full amount of damage, and I want to say 15% reduced time or something like that. So basically, it makes the dots tick quicker. And yeah, that's basically all it is. It's a really bland generic Druid legendary, but it's not bad on AoE because a lot of our options for legendaries are just pretty lackluster outside of boat. I don't think that I'm actually super excited for any of the Moonkin legendaries like I hoped I initially would be. And initially would be meaning like whenever I don't know, whenever I was initially speculating what the Balance Druid legendaries would be, I was kind of hyped for them, but like more recently I have not been super fond of it. But yeah, Venthyr, pretty cool. Circle of Life and Death, not great. I suspect that this means you end up playing Circle of Venthyr for most of progression rating, if that's your main focus, or if you're just like a Mythic Plus player, you end up just playing Venthyr. Balance of all things is probably going to be the first legendary you craft if you are a raider, whereas Circle of Life and Death, if you're a Mythic Plus only player, maybe your go-to. So those kind of things are to take into account. Let's talk about Night Fae, because I think I get this question probably the most out of all about Night Fae's viability and about how I feel about Night Fae. For me, if you have any intent on doing Mythic Plus as a Moonkin, I would highly recommend staying away from Night Fae if you care about being competitive damage-wise. If you don't care about being competitive damage-wise, pick whatever the fuck you want. I think that it doesn't really matter, and ultimately that is your choice, and you can decide whatever you want. If you're trying to be competitive damage-wise and you're doing dungeons, I do not believe that Night Fae is an option that you can take that will lead you to be competitive. Let's just bump this up to like 5 targets just to prove why. Where is the first Night Fae here? So Night Fae with Circle of Life and Death is at 15,120 damage, where Venthyr plus Circle of Life and Death is at 16,360. That is a humongous swing, just purely because Night Fae does not scale that well on AoE. Because stackable Starfall isn't a thing, and really the damage gained by all of the Star Surges or other abilities that you cast during your Night Fae is not going to be great. Let's talk about if you plan on raiding only as Balance. If you plan on raiding only as Balance, I can see a world where you could almost argue that this is close enough to Venthyr and or Necrolord to warrant taking, because you value the class fantasy or fun or whatever else, right? In terms of damage, I could see a world in raid where Night Fae is not the absolute worst. It's still going to be worse mathematically, but it's not going to be just... You're not going to be holding your whole entire group back by taking it, is what I am trying to get across. I do think that there are a few AoE fights in raid, like Sun King Salvation, Sire Denathrius, Stone Legion Generals, where Venthyr would actually be a significantly better pick, even over that of Necrolord. But like ultimately, if you care about class fantasy or fun, and like straight up, if you're not like really pushing for super early cutting edges, you absolutely can play Night Fae and probably get away with it. If you care about like, and that is if you are rating only and don't care so much about like being the most optimal. If you care about rating somewhat, and you play an alt spec like Resto for Mythic Plus, Night Fae may not actually be a bad option for you, especially if you care about Mythic Plus more than raid. It's unfortunate that you're put in a position where you have to make this choice, but Night Fae is an excellent choice for Restoration right now. Almost mandatory for them to be able to do competitive amounts of throughput, from what I understand. And like I said, you don't really sacrifice that much in raid. Like you do end up sacrificing some, but like if Mythic Plus is like your main focus, and you're really big into healing in Mythic Plus, and you just kind of want to skate by in raid, go Night Fae, like whatever, right? Kyrian, Pelagos recently got nerfed, so these sims aren't fully up to date. So Pelagos had the big ass mastery proc, so I suspect that this number is going to drop like a pretty decent amount, making Kyrian no longer like the biggest choice on this row, which honestly not bad. So yeah, again, this is dreamgrove.gg/beta if you want to look at these sims yourself. So let's talk talents a little bit. And so basically there are only a few things that I really want to discuss talent wise. Nature's Balance versus Warrior Valoon versus Force of Nature. Nature's Balance is premier talent on that row. Not really much to talk about. Soul of the Forest versus Starlord versus Incarn. Soul of the Forest is for Mythic Plus. It's really solid for Mythic Plus. The AoE splash damage on Starfire is good. Starlord, premier talent for single target /raid. Incarn doesn't really have a great niche currently. Stellar Drift is the AoE talent. Stellar Flare is a single target talent. I don't really think that this needs too much explaining. Twin Moons is kind of undertuned relative to the power of Stellar Drift right now, so yeah. And then Solstice on the tier, was it 60 row, is just the tier 50 row probably, is the only talent that you should be playing currently if you're able in a new moon or not good. So those are those talents. There's actually not a lot of options in the damage rows. Like, basically you're locked into 2 builds, and you don't really pick too much. Soul of the Forest plus Stellar Drift or Starlord plus Stellar Flare, and you don't really pick anything else. And that's basically that. Okie dokie. So let's talk about Moonkin's niche. So basically right now Moonkin has a pretty strong 3-minute burst cooldown niche, especially whenever you are running that Venthyr Covenant. Basically Ravenous Frenzy plus Celestial Alignment gives you an incredible amount of power on your 3-minute cycles. So making sure that you use the most of that is going to be important. We're going to remain a pretty heavy cooldown reliant class, which 3-minute CDs are kind of cringe, but at the same time, they're not the worst possible things. It's fine to be cooldown reliant, but being cooldown reliant on a 3-minute cooldown class is not exactly ideal in my personal perspective of the game, but it's just something that you have to work around. Another really solid Balance Druid niche is probably the most notable one, is that our sustained AoE for long periods of time is incredibly powerful. So once you start getting up into 45 seconds, the 50 seconds, the minute-long pulls, where pulls are lasting a long-ass time, then you start actually seeing your AoE begin to prosper pretty heavily. And on top of that, if anything is ever spread, then you're just probably the best class in the game because of how Rework Starfall ends up functioning, where you are able to hit a large amount of targets that other classes just are not able to play. Able to hit, rather, is what I mean. Yeah, so basically those are definitely Moonkin's niche. Personally, I kind of prefer the Eclipse iteration of Moonkin over the Empowerment iteration of Moonkin, but that is a personal preference, and I get the question, how do I feel about Moonkin? And the answer for me is I enjoy it on an individual level. I'm not really too worried about how it's going to perform. I think right now on beta, it is slightly undertuned on single target, especially whenever you're outside of your cooldowns. On AoE, I think it's fine if the trash mobs live long enough, but on packs that get just absolutely murdered, like there are a couple of classes that are overtuned on beta right now, like Frost Mage and Hunter. Like if trash packs get absolutely just murdered instantly, you can't really do too much, but that's always been the state of Moonkin. Like being a sustained AoE class, we have to get our dots rolling. Our ramp up time is normally fairly high, so that's how it's always been. But like if you're going to do lower level keys, that's just like something that you're going to have to deal with, and you're probably going to be worse off because of it. But once the trash mobs start actually living a while, Moonkin's damage is fairly competitive on the higher end of stuff. I think that I do tend to agree, though, that on single target, we're slightly undertuned, which may end up putting us in a better position come like raid release, whenever they're looking at classes and they're like, oh shit, how do we need to balance this? And they just like slap like a, I don't know, say 10% aura on us or like 8% aura on us. That just kind of buffs up our AoE even more, even though we're already, I would say we're like close to competitive. There's some classes that are still outliers, so it's kind of hard to see where all the chips are going to fall, but assuming that we are undertuned on single target like it seems like we are, I'm not too concerned in terms of viability. Like that, it's how it always is, right? You never know, like for the first tier of an expansion, like what's going to be good, what's going to be viable until like literally heroic week, whenever shit's being played for the first tier, and every guild kind of needs like a wide range of everything. So you're going to need some people who are probably going to be benched, and sometimes the cookie crumbles that way. Am I going to play Balance Druid though? I think I get to ask this question also a fairly large amount of time. Answer is yes. I'm going to be playing Moonkin almost no matter what. Actually, not almost no matter what. I'm going to be playing Moonkin for the first tier no matter what. My guild has decided that we want 2 Moonkins, and it may or may not be good for Stone Legion Generals and Sire Denathrius. I think right now, if the expansion shipped today, it would not be great, but it wouldn't be bad. But there's still a large amount of time. There's a large amount of balance tuning, and the world isn't ending. So we will see where everything ends up landing. I'm actually excited to play Shadowlands, and I'm ready to get the fuck out of BFA. And I think that's probably common sentiment. With that said, we're going to pray for some more balance buffs. We're going to pray for some more positive changes. If there's anything that I would like to see change, is still the same shit that probably had last time. More astral power generation on AoE, stackable Starfall. Those are probably the two biggest things that I would love to see. I wouldn't hold my breath though. So I think that those are probably not coming. Maybe a legendary rework on a couple of these legendaries. Like, don't have me fucking playing Circle of Life and Death, but don't have me playing Necrolord on single target either. That's not fun, but we'll see. Overall, I'm excited for Moonkin, and I'm excited for Shadowlands, and I think that you guys should be too. And I will see you guys in the next video, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I will see you guys later. Goodbye.